Hello, everyone. Welcome back to English Pods. I'm Jennifer, and as always, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Elizabeth. How are you today, Elizabeth?
I'm doing great, thank you. I'm especially excited about today's episode because we're going to explore a topic that I think resonates with so many of us: modern life versus cultural life. In today's fast-paced world, we often find ourselves caught between embracing modern advancements and holding on to the cultural traditions that give our lives depth and meaning.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. I think everyone feels that tension at some point. Modern life brings us incredible conveniences and opportunities, but it can also feel overwhelming or disconnected from the traditions that have shaped us. Today, we're going to dive deep into what it means to live in this balance, why it matters, and how we can navigate between these two worlds to create a life that feels rich, purposeful, and authentic.
That's right, Jennifer. And before we get started, I want to remind our listeners to subscribe to English Pods if you haven't already. Staying subscribed means you won't miss any of our episodes, and it's a great way to keep improving your English skills while engaging with meaningful topics. If you find today's episode helpful or interesting, please like and share it with your friends. Your support helps us keep growing this wonderful community.
We truly do appreciate all of you tuning in and supporting us. Now, let's jump right into our topic. So, Elizabeth, why don't we start by talking about what we mean by modern life and cultural life? How do you see these two terms?
Great starting point, Jennifer. When we talk about modern life, we're referring to a lifestyle that's heavily influenced by recent developments, things like digital technology, social media, urbanization, and the global economy. It's a way of living that values speed, convenience, efficiency, and often individualism. For instance, think about how we communicate today: texting, video calls, social media posts. All of it is fast and often impersonal.
Exactly, Elizabeth. And it's fascinating how these modern conveniences can also become sources of stress. We're constantly connected, always expected to respond quickly, and often feel pressure to keep up with an ever-accelerating pace of life. On the other hand, cultural life refers to the more traditional ways of living that emphasize community, family, heritage, and rituals. It's about the customs and practices that have been passed down through generations, like celebrating traditional festivals, maintaining specific forms of art or music, and even speaking a native language.
Yes, cultural life is deeply rooted in history and values continuity over change. It's about preserving the essence of who we are as people, where we come from, and what we believe in. In many cultures, traditions help to maintain a sense of belonging and identity. But in our modern, globalized world, there's often a conflict. How do we keep these traditions alive while also embracing the new ways of living that come with modernization?
That's such a good question, Elizabeth. I think a lot of people feel that conflict, especially when they move to a new country or grow up in a culture different from their parents. Let's look at some concrete examples. For instance, take communication styles. In many traditional cultures, communication is very personal and often face-to-face. People take time for small talk, they value body language, eye contact, and often there's a lot of ritual in how greetings are exchanged.
Yes, and it's fascinating because that kind of communication builds trust and relationships. It shows respect and interest in the other person. But in modern life, especially in urban environments, communication is often digital: quick texts, emails, or social media messages. It's efficient, but it can also feel impersonal or rushed. There's a risk that we lose that deeper connection.
Absolutely, and that affects how we build relationships. In the past, people would spend time together, share meals, and have long conversations. Now, much of our interaction happens online, and it can lack the same depth or emotional connection. Do you think this shift affects how we form friendships and maintain relationships today?
Definitely, Jennifer. I think there's a trade-off. On one hand, modern technology allows us to connect with people across the world instantly, which is amazing. But on the other hand, we might be losing the patience and effort required for deeper, more meaningful relationships. It's a bit like fast food versus a home-cooked meal. One is quick and convenient, the other is slower but much more nourishing.
That's such a great analogy. And it also makes me think about how this balance plays out in other areas, like work. In many traditional cultures, Work was often tied to community or family, with roles passed down through generations. Modern life, however, is characterized by a fast-paced work environment, often in large cities, where people might switch jobs frequently, focus on personal achievement, and experience high levels of stress.
Exactly. In traditional settings, work was often more predictable and stable, but perhaps not as dynamic or lucrative. Now we're seeing a shift towards career mobility and entrepreneurship, which brings freedom but also uncertainty and a sense of constant competition. And I think this affects not just individuals but entire communities, as people move away from their hometowns or even their countries in search of better opportunities.
That's true, and it often means leaving behind cultural traditions or adapting them to new environments. Take something as simple as meal times. In many traditional cultures, meals are a time for families to gather and connect. There are rituals around what is eaten, when, and how. But in modern life, especially in urban settings, meals are often eaten on the go, in front of a screen, or skipped entirely due to busy schedules.
Yes, and that impacts not only our health but also our sense of community and well-being. Sharing a meal is about more than just eating. It's about bonding, sharing stories, and maintaining traditions. In fact, studies have shown that families who eat together regularly tend to be more connected and supportive of each other.
That's a great point, Elizabeth. And it highlights how cultural practices often serve a deeper purpose beyond the obvious. They create a rhythm to life, provide opportunities for connection, and reinforce shared values. Yet, modern life often pushes us to prioritize efficiency and convenience over these deeper, slower practices.
Absolutely, and it's not just about meals. Consider how we celebrate holidays and festivals. Traditionally, these are times of gathering, storytelling, dancing, and music. But now, many people experience holidays through social media, posting pictures or videos instead of fully engaging in the moment. While this allows us to share our experiences with a broader audience, it can also mean we're less present in the actual experience.
Yes, and it brings up the question, are we really experiencing these moments, or are we just documenting them? I think this shift also affects how younger generations perceive cultural traditions. When a festival or a holiday becomes more about getting the perfect photo than about the ritual itself, some of the deeper meaning can be lost.
That's so true. And I think it's also about how we're taught to value these traditions. In many cultures, elders pass down knowledge, stories, and practices to the younger generation, often through oral traditions or hands-on experiences. In modern life, much of our learning is digital or informal educational settings, which can be great for knowledge but might lack the personal touch of a grandparent telling a story or a parent teaching a traditional recipe.
Yes, Elizabeth, and I think this also ties into language. Language is a key part of culture. In many places, younger generations are losing their native languages because of the dominance of global languages like English. This can create a gap between generations and a loss of cultural identity.
That's a very important point, Jennifer. Language carries culture, its stories, values, and ways of seeing the world. When a language fades, we lose more than just words. We lose a unique perspective on life. And yet, there's also a push for people to learn global languages to compete in the modern world. So it's a delicate balance.
Exactly. And it's not just languages, but also practices and traditions. For example, traditional crafts or ways of farming are often seen as outdated in modern contexts, but they carry knowledge and techniques that are incredibly valuable, especially as we think about sustainable living.
That's a great point. Many traditional practices are actually more sustainable because they were developed in harmony with nature over centuries. Modern practices, while efficient, can sometimes be very wasteful or damaging to the environment. So there's a lot we can learn by blending the wisdom of the past with the innovations of the present.
Yes, and I think this is where we find the key to balancing modern and cultural life. It's not about choosing one over the other, but finding ways to integrate them meaningfully. For example, using technology to preserve and share cultural knowledge, or using modern science to improve traditional practices.
Absolutely, Jennifer. And I think it's also about being intentional. If we know that certain cultural practices like family meals or community gatherings bring us joy and connection, then we need to make space for them in our busy modern lives.
I completely agree. And speaking of making space, I'd love to hear from our listeners on how they balance these two aspects of life. Maybe we should take a call now. I'm sure our audience has some great insights to share. Let's see who's on the line. Hi there. You're on the air with Jennifer and Elizabeth. What's your name and where are you calling from?
My name is Ravi, and I'm calling from Mumbai, India. I've been listening to your podcast for a while now, and I really enjoy it. I wanted to share my experience of trying to balance modern life with my cultural traditions.
We're so glad you called. We'd love to hear your experience. How do you find that balance between modern life and cultural life?
Well, it's definitely a challenge. I work in a tech company, so my day is filled with emails, meetings, and deadlines. It's very fast-paced, and sometimes I feel like I'm always rushing. But I also come from a family that places a lot of importance on cultural traditions, like our festivals, family gatherings, and daily prayers.
That sounds like a tough balance to strike, Ravi. How do you manage to keep both aspects alive in your life?
I think it's about setting priorities and making time for what matters. For example, even though I have a busy schedule, I make sure to participate in all the major festivals with my family. I also try to keep some traditional practices in my daily routine, like starting my day with a few minutes of meditation and prayer, which helps me stay grounded.
That's wonderful, Ravi. Sounds like you've found a way to integrate both worlds. Have you found that keeping these traditions has helped you manage the stress of modern life?
Definitely. I think having that cultural anchor helps me stay balanced. It reminds me that there's more to life than just work and deadlines. It's also a way of staying connected to my roots and my community, which is really important to me.
That's such a valuable insight, Ravi. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. It's great to hear how you're making it work.
Thank you, Jennifer and Elizabeth. I'm really glad I could share my story. Keep up the great work with the podcast.
Thanks, Ravi. We appreciate your call.
That was such an inspiring call. It's always wonderful to hear how people are finding ways to keep their traditions alive while navigating the demands of modern life.
Absolutely, Jennifer. Ravi's experience really highlights the importance of being intentional about maintaining cultural practices. Even in a busy world, it's possible to make time for what truly matters.
Yes, and it's about finding that balance that feels right for you. I think we could all benefit from taking a moment to reflect on which traditions and practices bring us joy and connection, and then finding ways to incorporate them into our daily routines, no matter how busy we are.
Definitely. And speaking of balance, I think another interesting area to explore is how different cultures approach this topic. For example, in some cultures, there's a very strong emphasis on community and collective well-being, while in others, individual achievement and personal freedom are more highly valued.
That's so true. In many Eastern cultures, for instance, there's a great emphasis on community, family, and harmony. Traditional practices often revolve around family gatherings, community events, and shared responsibilities. In contrast, in many Western cultures, there's a greater emphasis on individualism, personal goals, and independence.
Right, and neither approach is inherently better or worse. They just offer different perspectives on what it means to live a fulfilling life. The challenge in today's globalized world is finding a way to honor both the collective and the individual, the modern and the traditional.
Yes, it's about blending the best of both worlds. For instance, using modern technology to enhance cultural practices. There are so many examples of this, like people using social media to organize community events or digital platforms to learn and teach traditional skills.
That's such a great example. Technology doesn't have to be seen as a threat to tradition. It can be a powerful tool to help preserve and even revitalize cultural practices. For example, online platforms can bring together people from the same cultural background who live in different parts of the world, allowing them to share stories, recipes, music, and more.
Exactly, Elizabeth. And this brings us back to the idea of balance and integration. It's not about rejecting modernity or clinging to tradition out of fear of change. It's about consciously choosing the elements of both that enrich our lives and help us grow.
Absolutely. And as we start to wrap up this episode, I think it's important to remember that everyone's balance will look different. What works for one person might not work for another. Key is to stay true to what feels meaningful and fulfilling for you, whether that means embracing certain modern conveniences or cherishing cultural rituals.
Well said, Elizabeth. It's about creating a life that reflects our values, our history, and our hopes for the future. And with that, I'd like to remind our listeners to subscribe to English Pods if you haven't already. By subscribing, you'll stay connected with us and continue receiving valuable content to support your English learning journey.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please like and share it with anyone who might benefit from it. Your support helps us reach more listeners and grow our community.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Remember, it's not about choosing between modern life and cultural life. It's about finding the harmony that works for you.
We'll see you in the next episode. Take care and remember to keep balancing your modern and cultural selves.
Bye for now.